The station was too quiet. Not silent. Silence was rare in deep space. There was always some sound if you listened closely enough. Air recyclers breathing through hidden vents. Power relays ticking behind metal walls. The low, almost comforting vibration of a structure old enough to have settled into itself the way ancient bones settled into the earth. But this quiet was different. It was the quiet of something holding its breath. Commander Elena Vale stood alone at the observation gallery and looked out over the orbit of Kepri 9. The planet below turned slowly beneath the station's shadow, a blue-gray sphere wrapped in storm bands and broken clouds. From this distance it looked peaceful, untouched by politics, treaties, or the kind of fear that made men and governments do irreversible things. Beyond it, the star burned red. Not bright red, not beautiful red. It had the tired color of an old wound. Its light spilled across the hull of the Diplomatic Station and painted every corridor window with the same dim stain. Elena had noticed it the moment her shuttle entered the system. She had not commented on it then. She did not comment on omens now. Omens were for people who wanted the universe to explain itself. The universe never explained anything. It simply happened to you. Behind her, the doors parted with a soft mechanical whisper. Her aide, Jonah Mercer, stepped into the gallery carrying a tablet against his chest. He was young enough to still move with visible urgency, still new enough to believe urgency itself could change outcomes. They moved the opening reception forward by 40 minutes, he said. All delegates have confirmed attendance. Elena did not turn immediately. All of them? Jonah checked the tablet though he already knew the answer. Every delegation. 21 worlds. That made her look back. 21 worlds meant all of them. Not the usual partial assembly. Not symbolic attendance. Not cautious observers sending junior diplomats and polite messages. Full representation. The kind of gathering that filled history books, if it went well. And if it did not, it tended to fill other kinds of records. That's unusual, Jonah added, as if he needed to say aloud what both of them already understood. Elena gave the smallest nod. Nothing about this summit is usual. She took one last look at the planet below and turned away from the glass. Her uniform was deliberately plain. Dark collar. Clean lines. No campaign ribbons, no polished medals, no visible reminders that she had spent 32 years serving in border wars and emergency theaters and ceasefire failures that were only called peace because everybody involved had become too tired to keep shooting. The absence was intentional. Tonight she was not supposed to look like a soldier. She was supposed to look like a promise. That, more than anything, made her uneasy. As they walked the corridor toward the central lift, station staff moved around them with careful efficiency. Too careful, Elena thought. Everyone was composed. Everyone smiled. Every greeting arrived a fraction too fast, as if rehearsed on the way out of the mouth. The station itself was beautiful in the manner of very expensive diplomacy. Tall vaulted passageways. Veins of gold alloy running through pale stone walls. Transparent sections opening to the stars. Flags and emblems suspended in measured symmetry. Every design choice seemed created to suggest the same thing. Civilization had outgrown its worst instincts. Elena had lived too long to trust architecture. "What's the security posture?" she asked. Jonah glanced down. Ceremonial protocols only. Defensive grids offline by agreement. Station patrols reduced to internal peacekeeping units. No military escort inside the summit ring. No exceptions? None on record. On record. That phrase stayed with her for 3 steps. They entered the lift with a pair of foreign delegates already inside. One tall and silver-skinned, the other broad, furred, and draped in layered formal cloth marked with geometric insignia. Both greeted Elena warmly. Both said they were honored by humanity's presence. Both spoke of shared futures and necessary understanding and how the galaxy had reached a turning point. Elena answered with the right words. She had spent half her life learning the right words. But while she spoke, she watched their eyes. Not because she thought they were lying. Not exactly. Most lies began with truth. Most betrayals began with ceremony, schedule, consensus, and signatures placed neatly at the bottom of important documents. The lift doors opened on the reception level. Music drifted through the main hall, soft enough to be elegant, distant enough to leave room for quiet conversations. Staff crossed the polished floor carrying trays of crystal glasses. Delegates clustered beneath banners and sculpted light columns, speaking in low voices. Above them all, suspended in the center of the chamber, rotated a holographic rendering of the core systems, every major world represented by a point of light connected in delicate strands, as though civilization itself were only a matter of keeping enough lines intact. For a moment, standing at the threshold, Elena could almost believe in it. A station with no guns active. 21 worlds in one room. Ancient rivals speaking politely beneath a shared map of the stars. Peace dressed up so beautifully it nearly resembled the real thing. Nearly. Then she noticed two things. The first was small. A security officer near the eastern archway touched his earpiece, stiffened, and then resumed his post a second too late, like a man who had heard something he had not expected to hear. The second was smaller still. One of the public comm panels on the wall near the entrance flickered once and went black. No one else seemed to notice. Elena did. She kept her expression unchanged. Jonah. He did not look at her. I saw it. Good. You think it's something? She watched the room. The diplomats. The staff. The guards. The red starlight bleeding faintly through the upper glass. I think, she said quietly, that tonight everyone is trying very hard to look comfortable. A server approached with a tray of drinks. Elena took one she did not intend to drink. Jonah did the same. Across the chamber, the host delegation began moving toward the central platform where the welcoming address would soon begin. Applause started in polite waves. Elena joined it a beat late. The sound filled the hall. Bright, civilized, harmless. And beneath it, almost too faint to hear, the station continued making that same low, patient sound, like a living thing waiting for the moment it no longer had to pretend. The speech was perfect. That was the first problem. Ambassador Kelrian stood at the center of the platform beneath the rotating star map, hands loosely folded, voice steady and measured in a way that suggested centuries of practice across 100 negotiations. We stand, he said, at the edge of something rare. The translation field carried his words seamlessly into every language in the room. No distortion. No delay. No misinterpretation. The kind of clarity diplomacy always promised and almost never delivered. Not a victory, he continued. Not a defeat. But an opportunity. A chance to choose what comes next, together. Polite applause followed. Exactly the right length. Exactly the right volume. Elena Vale watched from the edge of the assembly, glass untouched in her hand. Everything was right. The lighting. The pacing. The pauses between sentences. Even the arrangement of delegates had been carefully calibrated, old rivals spaced apart, neutral parties positioned. Between them, newer civilizations given just enough proximity to feel included without threatening established hierarchies. It was a masterpiece of control. And it made her more uneasy with every passing second. They've done this before, Jonah murmured beside her. Elena's eyes stayed on the room. Of course they have. Not like this, he said quietly. Not all of them. Not all at once. He was right. This wasn't a negotiation. This was alignment. 21 worlds had come here and agreed, before the first speech, before the first course was served, that they were ready to sit in the same room without weapons, without fleets in orbit, without defensive systems humming quietly in the background. That didn't happen because of hope. That happened because of confidence. Elena shifted her attention to the upper levels of the chamber where the security walkways curved along the walls. Personnel stood at even intervals, posture relaxed, movements minimal. Their weapons, what few were permitted under ceremonial protocol, remained holstered. Too relaxed, she thought. The kind of relaxed that only existed when someone believed nothing could go wrong. Or when something had already been decided. Kelrian's speech moved toward its conclusion. Tonight, he said, we begin not as adversaries, not as competing powers, but as participants in a shared future. One built not on fear, but on understanding. There was the word, understanding. It floated in the air like something delicate, something valuable, something that required careful handling. Elena had heard that word before. It usually came just before someone tried to redefine the terms. Applause rose again, stronger this time. Delegates stepped forward in small groups as the formal structure dissolved into movement and conversation. Staff circulated with renewed energy, guiding attendees toward designated sections of the hall for the opening reception. Jonah exhaled slowly. If this works, Elena finished the thought for him. It changes everything. He nodded. No more border conflicts. No more resource disputes escalating into war. We'd finally have a framework, she said. He blinked. Isn't that what we want? Yes. She set her glass down on a passing tray without drinking from it. It's also what everyone here wants to control. They moved deeper into the hall. Conversations overlapped in dozens of languages, all translated into a quiet hum of meaning. Laughter appeared in the right places. Hands extended. Agreements began forming in the spaces between formal declarations. A representative from the Thal Consortium approached them, offering a polite bow. Commander Vale, he said, it is an honor. Your presence here speaks volumes. Elena inclined her head. I hope it speaks clearly. We all do, he replied. Clarity has been in short supply. There was something in the way he said it. Not sarcasm. Not quite. Recognition. As if clarity, like peace, was something people agreed to in principle and undermined in practice. Your people have expanded quickly, he added. Faster than most predicted. Predictions tend to be conservative, Elena said. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes they are simply wrong. He smiled then, politely, and moved on. Jonah watched him go. That sounded like a compliment. It wasn't, Elena said. Across the chamber, a new group gathered near one of the side corridors. Delegates from older civilizations, their posture more reserved, their movements slower, more deliberate. They were not laughing. They were observing. Elena recognized that behavior. They were measuring. Notice anything? She asked. Jonah followed her gaze. They're not participating. They are, Elena said. Just not in the same way. Before he could ask what she meant, a tone sounded softly throughout the hall. Not an alarm. Not even intrusive. Just enough to draw attention. A station official stepped onto the platform. Honored delegates, she said, smiling with practiced ease, a brief adjustment to protocol. In the interest of full transparency and mutual trust, all external communication channels will be temporarily restricted during the initial summit proceedings. The words were delivered lightly, almost casually, but they landed with weight. Restricted. Jonah repeated under his breath. Standard security measure, the official continued. To ensure the integrity of discussions and prevent external interference. Internal systems remain fully functional. A ripple moved through the room. Not panic. Consideration. Delegates exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others hesitated for a fraction of a second before following suit. It was presented as protection. It always was. Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. They're closing the doors, Jonah said quietly. No, Elena replied, watching the official step down as the music resumed and the conversations picked up again, only slightly altered. They're asking everyone to believe the doors were never necessary. Jonah shifted his weight. Should we object? Elena considered it. 21 worlds. One room. No weapons. No external communication. And a narrative already forming around unity, trust, and shared future. If she objected now, she would be the only one. And the only one who didn't trust the process was the only one who would stand out. Not yet, she said. The music swelled slightly, filling the gaps where uncertainty had briefly appeared. Around them, the summit continued. Glasses clinked. Voices rose. Agreements began. Everything moved forward exactly as planned. And that was the second problem. Elena looked once more toward the comm panel near the entrance. Still dark. Still unnoticed. Still wrong. She turned back to the room, to the delegates, to the carefully constructed illusion of control and cooperation and peace. And for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself a single, quiet thought. This is happening too smoothly. The change didn't announce itself. It never did. There was no alarm. No sudden shift in tone. No visible break in the rhythm of the evening. The music continued. The conversations flowed. The illusion held. But something underneath it had moved. Elena felt it before she could define it. A subtle tightening. Like a room where the air had grown thinner, but no one had opened a window. She stepped away from the main chamber under the pretense of needing a quieter space. Jonah followed half a step behind, matching her pace without asking questions. He had learned that much already. The corridor outside was dimmer, lined with soft ambient lighting that traced the curve of the station's interior ring. The noise of the reception faded quickly, replaced by the steady mechanical breath of the station itself. Here, the quiet returned. But now it felt different. "Say it," Jonah said. Elena didn't slow. "The guard rotation." He blinked. "What about it?" "It changed." He frowned, pulling up the security overlay on his tablet. "They're still in position. Coverage is consistent. Look at the timing." He hesitated, then adjusted the display. His eyes moved quickly as the data resolved into patterns. "They're cycling faster," he said after a moment. "Yes. That could be procedural. Higher alert because of—" "They're not on higher alert," Elena cut in. "If they were, they'd increase presence, not rotation frequency." Jonah's expression shifted. "Then why?" "To move more people through the same space," she said. He looked up. "For what?" Elena didn't answer immediately. They passed a comm terminal embedded in the wall. Its interface panel was dark. She stopped. Pressed it. Nothing. Jonah tried the one beside it. Same result. "They said internal systems were operational," he said. "They are," Elena replied. "Just not for us." Jonah's grip tightened slightly on the tablet. "You think this is intentional?" Elena stepped back from the terminal and continued down the corridor. "I think," she said carefully, "that systems don't fail in clusters without a reason." Behind them, 2 security officers rounded the curve of the hall. Their pace was steady, their posture relaxed. But as they passed, one of them glanced, just briefly, at Elena. Not recognition. Assessment. The kind of look you gave someone when you were confirming something you already knew. Elena kept walking. "Did you see that?" Jonah asked quietly. "Yes." "You think they're watching us?" "I think they're watching everyone," she said. "That's normal, isn't it?" "Not like this." They reached an intersection where the corridor branched toward the residential wing. A pair of delegates stood nearby, engaged in quiet conversation. Their voices were low, but the tension in their posture was not. One of them paused mid-sentence as Elena approached, then resumed a second later, just slightly too quickly. Another small thing. Another detail that didn't fit. Elena slowed. "Listen," she said. Jonah tilted his head. At first, there was nothing. Delayed. Not in protocol. Temporary, they said. Fragments of conversation. Different languages, same tone. Uncertainty. Not open concern. Not yet. But spreading. Like a hairline cracking glass. Elena exhaled slowly. "The room knows," she said. Jonah looked at her. "Knows what?" "Not what's wrong," she said. "Just that something is." They continued toward the residential wing. The lighting here was softer. More private. Designed to feel safe. Doors lined the corridor at regular intervals, each marked with the insignia of the delegation assigned to it. Human quarters were near the end. As they walked, Elena noticed another detail. The station staff were gone. Not completely. Not obviously. But the density had changed. Fewer faces. Fewer movement patterns. The kind of absence you only noticed if you had already started looking for it. "Where did they go?" Jonah murmured. "Reassigned," Elena said. "To where?" She didn't answer. They reached their door. Jonah stepped inside first, scanning the room out of habit. Standard layout. Undisturbed. No visible tampering. Elena followed, letting the door close behind them with a soft seal. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jonah turned. "We should report this." "To who?" "The summit coordinators. Security command. Someone." Elena moved to the small desk near the window and picked up the station-issued comm unit. Powered on. Connected. She opened a channel. Nothing. Tried another. Same result. Jonah watched. "Maybe the restriction applies here too." "It does," she said. He swallowed. "Then we use our own systems." Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a smaller device. Older. Personal. Not part of the station network. She held it in her hand for a moment. Thinking. Not reacting. That was the difference between fear and experience. Fear made you move fast. Experience made you move right. "It could still be nothing," Jonah said. Elena looked at him. "Say that again," she said. He hesitated. "Could be nothing." She nodded once. "That's the part that matters." He frowned. "I don't understand." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "In every operation I've ever seen go bad," she said, "there's a moment like this. A moment where everything still looks normal. A moment where you can still explain it away. A moment where acting feels like overreacting." She paused. "And that moment," she said quietly, "is always the last chance you get to be early." Jonah didn't speak. The weight of that settled between them. Elena turned back to the device. Her thumb hovered over the activation pad. If she was wrong, this would look paranoid. If she was right. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. She activated the unit. The signal was narrowband. Encrypted. Old enough to be ignored by most modern interception protocols. A relic. Which made it useful. She typed slowly. Deliberately. Every word mattered. No explanations. No speculation. Just truth. Something is wrong. Prepare. She stared at the message for a second longer than necessary. Then she sent it. The device blinked once. Transmission complete. Or at least, attempted. Jonah exhaled. "Will it get through?" "I don't know," she said. "Will they understand it?" Elena met his eyes. "Yes." He nodded. For a moment, the room was still again. Quiet. Controlled. Normal. A faint sound. From the corridor. Not loud. Not urgent. But wrong. Elena's head turned slightly toward the door. Jonah followed her gaze. "Did you hear that?" She didn't answer. Because she was listening. Footsteps. More than one set. Measured. Approaching. Not hurried. Certain. Elena set the device down. Slowly. Carefully. Her expression didn't change. But something inside it hardened. The moment had passed. Whatever came next was no longer avoidable. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Not abruptly. Not with urgency. They slowed, then settled. As if whoever stood on the other side already knew exactly where they were. Jonah took a half step back. "Elena!" She raised a hand. Silence. No scrambling. No panic. No reaching for anything that wasn't there. Because there was nothing to reach for. No weapons. No external comms. No support. That had been the agreement. That had been the point. The lock disengaged with a soft, almost polite sound. And the door opened. Light from the corridor spilled into the room, cutting a sharp line across the floor. For figures stood in the frame. Not ceremonial sidearms. Not symbolic. Military-grade weapons held low and ready, the kind designed for efficiency, not intimidation. Their armor bore no visible insignia. No flags. No identifying marks. Professional. Deliberate. Final. Jonah's breath caught. This isn't. Elena didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't raise her voice. She sat exactly where she was, hands resting lightly on her knees, posture straight, eyes steady. She had seen this moment before. Different rooms. Different wars. Same shape. "Commander Elena Vale," one of the figures said. The voice was filtered. Neutral. Stripped of tone. Not hostile. Not apologetic. Just procedural. "That's me," she replied. "You will come with us." Jonah stepped forward despite himself. On whose authority? The nearest figure didn't even look at him. Step aside. I'm not. Elena. Her voice stopped him. Not sharp. Not forceful. Just certain. Jonah turned to her, disbelief written across his face. We can't just. Yes, she said quietly. We can. He stared at her, trying to understand, trying to find the part of this that still made sense. There's been a mistake, he said, but it sounded weaker now. This summit, this is a diplomatic. It's not, Elena said. The word landed clean. No anger. No hesitation. Just truth. Jonah's shoulders tightened. Then what is it? Elena looked past him at the 4 figures in the doorway. At this point, she said, it's already decided. The pause. Not long, but enough. The kind of pause where everyone in the room understood the same thing at the same time. There would be no negotiation. No explanation. No last-minute correction. This was not a misunderstanding. This was the plan. The lead figure shifted slightly. Commander. Now. Elena stood. Slowly. Deliberately. No sudden movements. No resistance. Not because she accepted it, but because resistance, here, in this room at this moment, would change nothing. She took 1 step forward. Then stopped. Turned slightly toward Jonah. Listen to me. His eyes were wide now. Angry. Confused. Afraid. All of this, everything tonight, it was built to look like trust, she said. He shook his head. Then why bring us here at all? Why not just? Because, she said, this way we came willingly. The words settled heavily. Jonah's voice dropped. Elena. She held his gaze. You're going to walk out of this room in 5 minutes, she said. You're going to act like nothing is wrong. You're going to observe everything. And when you get the chance, any chance, you send word. I know, she said. A flicker of something passed between them. Understanding. Too late but still real. What about you? He asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. They both knew. I'll manage, she said finally. It wasn't reassurance. It was closure. The lead figure took a step forward. We are done here. Elena nodded once. To Jonah. Not to them. Then she turned and walked toward the door. She didn't look back. Didn't hesitate. Didn't slow. The 4 figures shifted to flank her as she crossed the threshold. The corridor beyond was empty now. Controlled. Prepared. The door slid shut behind them with a soft final click. Jonah stood alone. For a moment, the room felt impossibly still. A faint flicker from the corner of his eye. Turned. The comm panel. Dead a moment ago. Now active. A line of text scrolled briefly across its surface. Intercept confirmed. Forwarded. Jonah's stomach dropped. No. Somewhere, deep in the station systems, something had seen the message. Something had understood it. And something had acted. Far below, in the communications core of Aurelia Station, a technician watched the flag transmission resolve on his screen. Old encryption. Human origin. Urgent. He didn't hesitate. He forwarded it. Protocol demanded it. In another room, on another level, far from the polished halls of diplomacy, Ambassador Kelrian read the message in silence. Something is wrong. Prepare. He set the device down carefully. Considered it. Then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Proceed, he said. In orbit above 21 human worlds. Space moved. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But precisely. At the exact same moment, across distances too vast for instinct to comprehend, fleets came out of dark space. Silent. Perfectly timed. The betrayal wasn't beginning. It had already begun. And by the time anyone realized it, it was already too late. The sky changed first. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But on 21 human worlds, spread across light years of space, the same impossible thing began to happen. Stars appeared where there had been none. At first, they were just points of light, sharp, clean, motionless against the dark. Then they grew. Chips. Hundreds of them. Dropping out of dark space in perfect synchronization. No drift. No error. No delay. Precision on a scale that only came from years of preparation. Above New Carthage, the fleet arrived in silence. 212 vessels arranged in layered formation, each holding position with exact mathematical spacing. Capital ships at the center. Carriers behind. Interceptors fanned out in a protective shell. From the surface, they looked like a second sky. Cold. Geometric. Wrong. Above Mars, the same pattern unfolded. 170 ships. Closer formation. Denser orbit. Positioned directly over the colony domes. Above Kepler, 442, 98 ships. Above the outer colonies, smaller formations, 40, 60, 80 vessels each, scaled precisely to the population below. Not random. Never random. Calculated. Every world received exactly what it needed to be overwhelmed. No more. No less. Across human space, the result was identical. People looked up and saw the same thing. A sky that no longer belonged to them. On New Carthage, Commander Sue watched it all from orbit. He stood on the bridge of the flagship, hands clasped behind his back, posture relaxed. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Deployment complete, his tactical officer said. Synchronization? Sue asked. Perfect. Of course it was. They had spent 3 years ensuring it would be. One early detection. One warning. One system raising shields ahead of schedule. And the entire operation would have collapsed. So they had removed the variables. Cut communication. Isolated targets. And struck all at once. Sue allowed himself a small breath of satisfaction. Begin standard protocol. The transmission went out. Identical across all 21 worlds. Translated into every human language. Final. This is the Conclave Command Authority. You are instructed to surrender all military assets immediately. Ground all vessels. Disable all defenses. Do not resist. Compliance will ensure the safety of your civilian population. You have 1 hour. On Earth, the message played across every network. On Mars, it echoed through colony channels. On distant agricultural worlds, it arrived through outdated receivers and personal devices. The same words, the same tone, the same promise. On the Conclave flagship, Sue waited. This part was always the same. Confusion. Then calculation. Then surrender. It had happened before. For times. For civilizations brought to heel in under 6 hours. The models were clear. Overwhelming force. Perfect coordination. Minimal resistance. Efficient pacification. Any response? Sue asked. None yet. Expected. He turned slightly, watching the planet below. Cloud systems shifted slowly across the surface. Cities flickered faintly along the dark side. From this distance, it didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like something already decided. 1 hour. That was more than enough. Long enough for leadership to assess the situation. Long enough to understand the futility. Long enough to choose survival. Across human space, the same clock began. 60 minutes. 59. 58. On most worlds, there was no immediate response. No counterattack. No broadcast of defiance. No desperate attempt to engage. Just silence. Which, to the Conclave, meant compliance. Or at least the beginning of it. Maintain position, Sue said. Prepare for ground deployment at 0. His officers acknowledged without hesitation. Everything was routine. Everything was controlled. Everything was predictable. Below, on New Carthage, in a small farming settlement 80 kilometers from the capital, a man named Harlan Voss stepped outside his house and looked up. He had been awake early. He always was. The irrigation system on the north field had been acting up, and it was easier to fix things before the sun climbed high enough to make everything harder. He wiped his hands on a cloth, squinted at the sky, and froze. Because the stars were wrong. There were too many of them, and they weren't moving the way stars should. He stood there for a long moment, just looking, not understanding. He went back inside. In orbit, Commander Sue checked the time. 30 minutes remaining. Still no response. He frowned slightly. Not concern. Just adjustment. Extend observation, he said. Delay deployment by 10 minutes. Understood. It wasn't unusual. Some civilizations took longer to process. Longer to accept. Longer to surrender. What mattered was the outcome. And the outcome, according to every model, was already decided. Across 21 worlds, the fleets held position. Silent. Unmoving. Certain. And below them, on farms. In cities. Inside colonies. Across ships and stations. Humanity looked up at the sky. And began to think. The first response did not come from a government. It did not come from a military command. It did not come from anyone the Conclave had listed as a decision-maker. It came from a farmer. Harlan Voss stood in his kitchen, staring at the sky feed replaying on the small wall display. Chips. Hundreds of them. Perfect formation. Not drifting. Not leaving. Waiting. The message had already played 3 times. He didn't need to hear it again. He turned the display off. The silence that followed was heavier. For a moment he just stood there. Thinking. Not about strategy. Not about politics. About his land. About the irrigation system he hadn't fixed yet. About the house he had built 20 years ago with his own hands. About the fact that something had arrived in orbit and was telling him, without asking, what was going to happen next. He poured himself a cup of coffee, took a sip, then reached for his comm unit. "Lena," he said when the call connected. His neighbor answered on the 3rd ring. "You seeing this?" "Yes." The pause. "What do we do?" Harlan looked out the window. The field stretched out beyond the house, quiet and ordinary and entirely his. He didn't answer right away. Then he said the only thing that made sense. "We don't wait." 2 houses down, Lena called her brother. Her brother worked at a mining cooperative 12 kilometers east. The cooperative had equipment. Heavy equipment. Drilling rigs. Explosives. Not weapons. But close enough. Within 40 minutes, 9 people were moving toward the hills. No uniforms. No orders. No plan written down anywhere. Just tools, vehicles, and a shared understanding that something had crossed a line. In orbit, Commander Sue's tactical display updated. Minor surface movement detected, an officer reported. Industrial activity. Sue barely glanced at it. Civilian reaction, he said. Irrelevant. On Mars, the response was different. But not really. Petra Vasquez hadn't slept. Her school project had turned into something else hours ago when the alert came through. The message had been clear. Surrender. Disable defenses. Do not resist. She had read it once. Then again. Then she had opened a different window. Old schematics. Archived systems. The colony's original defense grid. Decommissioned 6 years ago. Officially. But not removed. Because removing infrastructure cost more than leaving it in place. Because no one expected it to be needed again. Because people liked to believe that once something was turned off, it stayed off. Petra knew better. She had been inside that system before. Twice. On a dare. She knew where the shutdown commands lived. She knew which parts had been disabled and which had just been ignored. She knew how to wake it up. It took her 37 minutes. When the first Conclave dropship descended toward the outer perimeter, it was met by a defense system that was not supposed to exist. The impact lit the Martian dust in a brief, violent bloom. Then silence. On the Conclave command channel, a voice said, "That system is listed as inactive." Another voice responded, "It isn't." On Titan, the response was quieter, but no less deliberate. Royce sat at his kitchen table, watching the signal degrade as jamming protocols spread across the system. One by one, the feeds went dark. Outer colonies. Gone. He had seen this before. Not the same enemy. Not the same scale. But the same pattern. Cut communication. Isolate. Control. He stood up. Walked into the next room. His grandchildren looked up at him. "Come here," he said. They gathered around the table. "What's happening?" one of them asked. Something important? He said. Are we in danger? Royce considered the question, then nodded. Yes. The pause. Good. They stared at him, confused. He smiled slightly. Means we get to learn something useful. He pulled apart a standard comm unit, piece by piece, laid the components out on the table. Watch, he said. Cross-human space. The same pattern repeated. Not organized. Not coordinated. Not directed. A mechanic rerouted power from a cargo dock into a defense relay. A cargo pilot refused docking orders and redirected supplies to a settlement under threat. A medical team turned evacuation protocols into barricade strategies. A group of miners sealed a tunnel system and turned it into a choke point. None of them were soldiers. None of them had been told what to do. None of them were waiting for permission. And that, more than anything, was the problem. On New Carthage, Harlan and the others reached the hills. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. They knew the terrain. Knew where the ground was weak. Knew where pressure would matter. By the time the first Conclave ground units deployed, the hills were no longer just hills. They were traps. The first detonation came without warning. Not large. Not precise. But enough. On the Conclave tactical display, a red marker appeared. Then another. Then another. Resistance at Landing Zone 7, an officer reported. Civilian origin. Improvised explosives. Sue frowned. Casualties? Minimal. But what? They're repositioning. Sue leaned forward slightly. Explain. They're not holding ground, the officer said. They're moving. Adapting. On Mars, a second dropship went down. Then a third. On Titan, localized signals began interfering with Conclave comms. Weak at first. Then stronger. Across 21 worlds. The same report began to form. Not organized resistance. Not military opposition. Not strategic defense. Something else. Update, Sue said. His officer hesitated. Resistance is increasing. That's not possible. Agreed. Sue's gaze returned to the display. To the markers. To the pattern that wasn't supposed to exist. This isn't coordinated, the officer added. No, Sue said slowly. It isn't. He watched as another red marker appeared. Then another. Not in clusters. Not in formations. Everywhere. Then why is it spreading? The officer asked. Sue didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time since the operation began, he didn't know. Below. On farms. In cities. Inside colonies. Humans were not organizing. They were not waiting. They were not asking. They were acting. Individually. Simultaneously. Relentlessly. And the Conclave, for all its models, for all its planning, for all its certainty, had not planned for that. The second report did not sound like the first. Commander Sue knew that before he finished reading it. The first had been routine, measured, contained, the language of a system working as expected. The second was not. Resistance increasing across all sectors, the report began. Not localized. Not isolated. Sue stood in silence as the data streamed across the tactical display. New Carthage. Kepler. Outer colonies. Every world. Every landing zone. The same pattern. Casualties remain within acceptable parameters, the officer added carefully. That was the part that mattered. Not the losses. The pattern behind them. They're not holding positions, another officer said. They engage, withdraw, reappear elsewhere. That's not strategy, someone else added. That's chaos, a third voice said. Sue shook his head. No. All eyes turned to him. That would be easier. He stepped closer to the display. Zoomed in on New Carthage. Then out. Then across 3 other systems. Looking. Not at the fights. At the spaces between them. Show me engagement intervals, he said. The system complied. Data points appeared. Timings. Distances. Reactions. For a moment, no one spoke. That doesn't make sense, the tactical officer said. No, Sue agreed. It doesn't. Because the intervals were shrinking. Engagements were happening faster, closer together, more frequently. Not because orders were being issued, because responses were accelerating. They're learning, someone said. That's expected, another replied. Any resistance adapts over time. Sue didn't look away from the display. This isn't over time, he said. This is immediate. Another report came in. Then another. Then 5 more. Landing Zone 12 compromised. Defense grid active where none was recorded. Signal interference increasing. Civilian units coordinating without visible command structure. That last one lingered. Without command? An officer repeated. That's not possible. It's confirmed, the comms officer said. No centralized signal. No command frequency. No identifiable leadership structure. Sue exhaled slowly. That was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Every system broke the same way. Remove leadership. Disrupt communication. Fragment the structure. The body followed the head. Boys. That's how this works, one of the junior officers said, almost to himself. You isolate, you destabilize, you collapse. We've done it before, another added. 4 times. Yes, Sue said quietly. And every time. He didn't finish. Because this time, the pattern wasn't holding. He pulled up a different layer of data. Population response. Civilian movement. Resource usage. What are they doing? Someone asked. Sue studied the display. They're not waiting. Silence. They're not waiting for orders, he continued. They're not waiting for coordination. They're not waiting for leadership to tell them what this is. He zoomed in on one region. A cluster of incidents. Separated by distance. Connected by timing. Each individual, he said slowly, is responding to the presence of a threat. The words felt strange. Incomplete. They don't need instruction, he added. They don't need confirmation. They don't need permission. Another pause. Longer this time. That's inefficient, the tactical officer said. It should be, Sue replied. But it isn't. He turned away from the display. Just slightly. Enough to look at the room. At his officers. At the system they all trusted. We have spent 4,000 years, he said, learning how to dismantle coordinated resistance. No one spoke. We know how to cut command chains. We know how to disrupt communication. We know how to collapse structure. He looked back at the data. At the markers that kept appearing. But this. The beat. This has no structure to collapse. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It didn't hit like a shock. It settled. Slowly. Heavily. Inevitably. Then what are we fighting? Someone asked. Sue didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was not something their models had a word for. He watched as another report came in. Then another. Then 10 more. 17 worlds. 17 battlefields. 17 identical patterns. Not weakening. Not stabilizing. Not collapsing. Growing. They should be breaking, the tactical officer said. They always break. Sue shook his head. Not in disagreement. In correction. They aren't breaking, he said. He zoomed out. All the way. Until the entire operation was visible at once. 17 worlds. 17 fronts. 17 failures to behave correctly. And for the first time, in all the years he had studied war, in all the simulations, in all the campaigns, in all the victories, Commander Sue felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not yet. Uncertainty. They don't have a head, the officer said quietly. Sue watched the display. No. The pause. Or worse. He didn't look away. They all are. Silence filled the bridge. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because if that was true, if every individual acted like a decision point, if every human responded independently, if resistance didn't rely on structure, then there was nothing to cut, nothing to isolate, nothing to collapse, only something that kept going, and that was not in any model they had ever built. Elias Dern had never planned to be in charge. That was the first thing he said when it was over. And it was true. He was a logistics officer, not a commander, not a strategist, not someone who gave orders in battle. For 9 years, his job had been simple: get the right things, to the right place, at the right time. Fuel, food, parts, people. War, to him, had always been movement, not explosions, not tactics, just flow. Which is why, when everything stopped, when signals broke, when orders disappeared, when command chains went silent, he noticed it faster than anyone else. The ISV Carthage had not been part of the summit. That was the only reason it was still alive. It had been running a supply route at the outer edge of human space, far enough away to avoid the initial strike, close enough to catch fragments, broken transmissions, distorted signals, pieces of something too large to understand all at once. Dern sat in the command chair, not because he belonged there, because there was no one else left who did. The captain was gone. The executive officer, gone. Senior command, gone. Not here, but at the summit. He stared at the console, at the fragments of data, at the silence where structure should have been. Then he said the only thing that made sense. All right. The pause. 15 people looked at him, waiting. Let's figure out who's still out there. It took 3 days. Not because there was no one, because no one could hear anyone else. Every standard channel, compromised, monitored. Dern's communications officer, Sable, didn't sleep, didn't stop, didn't wait. She went backward. Old frequencies, obsolete bands, civilian channels, dead systems, things no one used anymore, because no one needed to, until now. On the 3rd day, a signal came back. Unstable. This is Mirror's Grace. Static. We're alive. Who's there? Dern leaned forward. This is ISV Carthage. Identify yourself. The pause. We thought we were alone. The Mirror's Grace was a civilian transport. Damaged. Overloaded. 47 survivors. 3 military personnel. 1 mechanic who still remembered how to fire a torpedo. We've got 1 weapon, the voice said, and not enough food. Dern nodded slowly. What do you need? There was a pause. Not hesitation. Something else. Then the answer came. What do you need? Dern sat back. Just slightly. Because that was not how this was supposed to work. They were damaged, outnumbered, low on resources. And the first thing they asked was how they could help. That was when he understood something. Not completely, not clearly, but enough. This is not going to organize itself, Sable said. Dern shook his head. No. He looked at the signal, at the connection, at the one thread that existed where none should have. It already is. More signals came. Slowly, one at a time. A cargo hauler, a mining ship, a research vessel, a patrol frigate running dark. Each one alone. Each one damaged. Each one searching. And each one, when they found another. No orders. No command. No structure. Just a decision. Stay together. By the end of the first week, there were 12 ships. By the second, 29. They didn't gather in formation. Didn't organize into fleets. Didn't declare ranks. Moved together. Shared information. Shared resources. Shared direction. Not because anyone told them to. Because it worked. Dern didn't give orders. Not at first. He asked questions. What do you have? Where are you? What can you do? And slowly, something began to form. Not a command structure. Something else. A network. Flexible. Shifting. Responsive. Alive. By week 3, they had 47 ships. Half military. Half civilian. None of them supposed to be there. All of them choosing to be. Dern called a full channel meeting. All ships. All voices. It wasn't formal. It wasn't controlled. It was loud. Message. Interruptions. Arguments. Ideas overlapping. A mining captain explained asteroid movement patterns. A cargo pilot described supply rerouting under pressure. A mechanic suggested ways to repurpose shielding. No one waited to be called on. No one asked permission to speak. And somehow, it worked. Dern sat there, listening, not leading, because leadership, he realized, wasn't about control. It was about direction. And direction was already emerging. They're tracking us, Sable said quietly. Dern looked up. Confirmed. She nodded. Conclave battle group. 200 ships. Silence. 47 ships. Mixed class. Improvised weapons. No central command. Against 200. By every model, they were already dead. Dern looked at the star map. At the space around them. At the options. Then he saw it. Not a plan. A possibility. A debris field. 3 light hours away. Remains of a shattered moon. That's unstable. Unpredictable. Perfect. He stood. Activated ship-wide comms. All ships. The pause. Every channel went quiet. This is Elias Dern. Another pause. I'm not your commander. I'm not giving orders. He looked at the display. At the incoming fleet. At the impossible situation. But I have an idea. He sent the coordinates. We go there. We go slow. We make noise. The beat. And when they follow us in. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was not hesitation. It was decision. One by one. Ships responded. Confirmed. On your vector. Following. 46 confirmations. The last came from an old destroyer. A museum ship. Reactivated. Its message was simple. We've been through worse. Dern almost smiled. Almost. He set the course. Watched the debris field grow. And for the first time since the war began, he felt something. Not hope. Something stronger. The realization that this might not be impossible. The war did not turn with a battle. That was the part no one expected. The debris field engagement had worked. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But enough. The Conclave fleet had followed. Because that's what superior forces did. They pursued. They pressed advantage. They assumed control. And inside the shattered remains of a dead moon, control meant nothing. 47 ships became shadows. Signals fractured. Formations broke. The Conclave lost 89 vessels in 9 hours. Dern lost 11. The math didn't make sense. It wasn't supposed to. But even that, even a victory like that, was not enough to win the war. Because the Conclave still had fleets. Still had numbers. Still had power. And more importantly, they still had the story. Across the galaxy, the official version spread. Humanity was unstable. Humanity was expanding too fast. Humanity was a risk to galactic balance. The strike had been necessary, measured, justified, and for a while, that version held. Because most civilizations hadn't seen the attack. They had only heard about it. And in war, what people hear matters more than what actually happens. Dern understood that. He sat alone in his quarters. The debris field behind them. The fleet regrouping. Signals stabilizing. And he read the Conclave broadcast. Twice. Then he closed his eyes. And thought. About Elena Vale. About her message. Something is wrong. Prepare. 8 words. Too late. But not useless. Because they proved something. She had known. And if she had known, then there had to be evidence. Dern opened a channel. Sable. She answered immediately. Here. I need the Galactic Broadcast Network. The pause. That's not possible. I don't need to control it, he said. I need to speak through it. Another pause. Longer. Thinking. It's heavily protected, she said. Multiple authentication layers. Conclave-controlled relays. Dern leaned back slightly. Nothing is fully controlled. Sable didn't respond right away. Because she knew what that meant. 3 weeks. That's how long it took. Not attacking. Not forcing. Finding. Old protocols. Forgotten pathways. Authentication signals no one had updated because they didn't think they needed to. The same mistake. Over and over again. Humans used what still existed. What still worked. What no one expected them to use. On the 22nd day, Sable looked up from her station. I'm in. Dern didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. Prepare the transmission. What are we sending? She asked. He thought about it. About the war. About the losses. About what mattered. Not propaganda, he said. Not threats. The beat. The truth. The broadcast began without warning. Across the galaxy, every relay, every system, every channel, switched. For 6 hours, humanity spoke. Not with speeches. Not with arguments. With evidence. First, the planning documents. 3 years of conclave preparation. Target lists. Timelines. The summit. Translated into every major language. Displayed without commentary. Just facts. The footage. Aurelia Station. Security feeds. Unedited. Delegates arriving. Systems shutting down. Armed figures entering rooms. Elena Vale. Standing. Not resisting. Not begging. The moment the door opened. The moment trust ended. Her message. Steady. Unfiltered. Something is wrong. Prepare. No explanation. No context. Just truth. And finally, the names. Not numbers. Not statistics. Names. People who came to negotiate peace. People who trusted. People who didn't leave. For 6 hours, the galaxy watched. Not a war. A betrayal. And when it ended, silence followed. Not confusion. Not denial. Recognition. Because no matter how complex civilizations became, no matter how advanced, they all understood one thing. Trust. And what it meant when it was broken. The response didn't come immediately. It never does. But it came. Quietly. Systematically. One civilization withdrew recognition from the conclave. Then another. Then 5. Then 17. No war declarations. No fleets moving. Distance. Legitimacy began to collapse. And without legitimacy, power changed. On the conclave flagship, reports came in. One after another. Allied systems reconsidering support. Neutral parties shifting stance. Internal dissent increasing. Lysara stood at the center of it. Reading. Processing. Understanding. Not emotionally. Not visibly. But completely. She had studied humanity for 30 years. Analyzed them. Modeled them. Predicted them. And she had been wrong. Not about their strength. Not about their speed. About their nature. They didn't fight us with force, one advisor said quietly. Lysara looked at the reports. At the collapse. At the unraveling. No, she said. They fought us with consequence. Because the moment the truth became visible, the war changed. It was no longer just about survival. It was about legitimacy. And the conclave, for the first time in its history, was losing both. On the ISV Carthage, Dern read the incoming reports, watched the shift, felt it. Not victory. Not yet. But something else. Weight lifting. Pressure changing. The galaxy had seen. And once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. He took a slow breath. Looked at the stars beyond the viewport. The war wasn't over. People were still fighting. Still dying. But the direction had changed. And that was enough. The war did not end in a single moment. There was no final battle. No decisive explosion. No line in space where one side stood victorious and the other disappeared. That was the first thing the historians got wrong. They kept looking for an ending. There wasn't one. What there was collapse. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Gradual. The kind of collapse that begins quietly. A missed supply delivery. A delayed reinforcement. A commander choosing retreat over position. Then another. Then 10 more. Because once legitimacy broke, everything built on it followed. Conclave fleets began to withdraw. Not because they were defeated in combat. Because they could no longer justify staying. Supply lines failed. Alliances fractured. Orders stopped being followed with certainty. And across human space, the resistance never stopped. That was the second thing they got wrong. They thought the resistance would peak, burn out, collapse under its own weight. It didn't. Because it was never centralized, never dependent, never fragile. It was everywhere. A farmer waking up before dawn and going back to the same fight. A teenager rewriting systems that weren't supposed to exist anymore. An old engineer teaching the next generation how to think when systems failed. It didn't need to win. It just needed to continue. And it did, month after month, until the Conclave realized something they had never had to consider before. This would not end on their terms. The message came quietly. Not a surrender. Not a threat. A request. Terms. Elias Stern read it alone. No ceremony. No audience. He had thought about this moment. More than he wanted to admit. Not what he would say, but what mattered. Because this was the part that defined everything that came before. He didn't respond immediately. He waited. Because waiting was something he understood. Then he sent the reply. Dissolve the conclave. Withdraw from all human space. Stand trial before a neutral court. Answer for every civilization that disappeared. No negotiation. No softening. With consequence. The silence that followed was longer this time. Because this was not a battlefield decision. This was something else. A recognition that the structure they had built, the one that had lasted for thousands of years, was already gone. They just hadn't said it out loud yet. They accepted. Not because they agreed. Not because they wanted to. Because the alternative was worse. The war ended the way it had been fought. Not with a final strike, but with something that refused to stop. Months later, the ruins of Aurelia Station still drifted in orbit. Unrepaired. Unclaimed. A monument. Not to the war. To the mistake. Elias Stern walked its corridors alone. The same halls where everything had begun. Now silent. Cold. The flags were gone. The lights dim. The structure broken. But one thing remained. A small plaque. Human. Simple. He picked it up. Turned it in his hands. On one side. On the other. One line. We come in peace. Stern stood there for a long time. Not angry. Not anymore. Because anger had done its job. What remained was something quieter. Understanding. Not of the enemy. Of humanity. Far from there. On a quiet world that had never fired a shot. A historian finished her work. She had watched the war from beginning to end. Studied it. Recorded it. Tried to understand it. And failed. Not completely. But enough to know something important. They had asked the wrong question. Why is humanity dangerous? But what happens to a species that survives everything? Ice ages. Plagues. Extinction events. What remains? After all of that? She wrote the answer slowly. Carefully. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. Humanity was not the strongest. Not the smartest. Not the most advanced. But it had something else. Something no model had accounted for. It did not stop. Not when it should. Not when it was told to. Not when it made sense. Somewhere in its history, over thousands of years of surviving things it shouldn't have, it had lost the ability to quit. And that, more than anything, was what the Conclave had failed to understand. They had seen chaos and called it weakness. They had seen emotion and called it instability. They had seen unpredictability and called it a problem. They had been wrong. Because what they were looking at was not a flaw. It was a result. A system shaped by survival. Refined by failure. Strengthened by everything that tried to end it. They had made an enemy of something that did not know how to be finished. And that was the heir. The oldest one. The most dangerous one. And the one the galaxy would spend the next 1,000 years trying to understand. Because out there, across 100 human worlds, people were still doing what they had always done. Arguing. Building. Breaking things. Fixing them. Going too far. Pulling back. Then going too far again. Not because they had won, but because they were still here. And for humanity, that had always been enough. The stars turned. The war became history. The lesson remained. And somewhere in the quiet, the galaxy understood something it had never understood before. Not what humanity was, but what it would always be. Something that kept going. No matter what.